Good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a great beginning of your day. And those who are tuning in during the day, I hope that your day is going well. So, my dear friends, we're on to the final stretch of Judaism's big ideas that are being discussed in this series. But before we go there, I would like to just bring up a point that you can always get recordings of our previous classes. If you go to jewishcenter.info/recordings, we have the whole series of classes of big ideas, and we've been building up over the last few months that we started spending time together in the morning. And I would encourage you to participate, to listen, and to join along in all of our other classes that can be found on our website, virtualjewishcenter.org. There's just stuff going on all the time, and we'll probably continue for a little bit, for sure, until we have a full opening, understanding that not everybody can come out, and we don't encourage you to come out if it's not safe for you. So we will continue our presence here online, and hopefully we'll continue to learn with each other. But once again, if you would like to get recordings, it's jewishcenter.info/recordings. So I'm actually very excited about this final stretch of the last three big principles. If you remember, we spoke about the 12 big ideas that the Rebbe introduced many years ago for children. And let me get that up here on the screen. And these ideas were there basically distilling all the information that we have in our Torah, in our tradition. Let me get that up here a little bit. In our tradition, oops, there we go. In our tradition, to bring them into some building blocks for our life. And we've gone through nine already. And as you can see, guidance, harmony, freedom, impact, relevance, mindfulness, purpose, tradition, success. These are all important things that we always think about. But today we're going to go to the number 10. And the last three units of unity, value, and happiness actually are kind of a shift from everything we've been talking about till now. Till now, we've been focused inward to find purpose and value in you as an individual. Now, all that is really just an introduction to how you can become a healthy individual, because one of the most important, not one, but the most important idea of Judaism is that it's not about you. It's about how you impact the world. And the first thing around you in the world that you have to impact are other people. So all these principles that we've been discussing till now are really to give you a healthier understanding of who you are. Because when you understand who you are better, you can have a greater impact. And the big principle of this idea of unity is a lot more than just being connected to other people. So I'm going to introduce the verse now. Let me get on here. And the idea of unity comes from a very, very famous verse in the Torah. And I'm going to bring that up a little bigger as we read it. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. There is a verse in the Torah, love thy neighbor as thyself. Rabbi Akiva says, Ze klal gadol b'Torah. This is a great basic principle of Torah. I'm going to bring it up a little bigger so we can read that again. Rabbi Akiva says that to love your fellow as yourself is a great basic principle of Torah. Now, let's understand this a little bit, because the Rebbe isn't introducing here for the children a verse of the Torah, love thy neighbor as thyself. What the Rebbe is introducing is what Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest sages of all time, as we discussed, I think, in our Shabbat sermon, the greatest sage of all time. What was his comment about this verse? That's what the Rebbe is trying to teach the children, that this is a great basic principle of Torah. I'm going to repeat that. This is a great basic principle of Torah. Now, I want you to understand what the impact of this is, because generally, when we talk about love thy neighbor as thyself, we talk about it as the golden rule. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Don't do unto others that which you do not want to be done to you. These are basically seen as a general rule. But what Rabbi Akiva says is it's a lot deeper than just being a rule. It's a principle. It's a basic principle. And what a basic principle means, it's not just an individual aspect. There are many rules. This is one rule, a golden rule, but a rule, one of many. What Rabbi Akiva says is that loving thy neighbor as thyself, this verse is a basic principle which permeates all the rules. See, principles are the foundations that filter into everything that we have. When you create rules, it has to be based on certain principles. So all rules are based on the principles. So loving thy neighbor as thyself is not just a suggestion. It's not just a great idea. It is a basic principle. And it's interesting that the Rebbe introduces to the children and to us to think of this as a great principle. This is the big idea. The big idea isn't to love thy neighbor as thyself. The big idea is that loving thy neighbor as thyself is a major principle. And who does the Rebbe choose to quote? Rabbi Akiva, who's a great Torah scholar, a great, what you may say, an intellectual, a professor, a teacher, a person who studied a lot and developed his own mind. And it was precisely Rabbi Akiva who said that despite all the study and intellectual knowledge and data that one absorbs in the study of Torah, what is the basic principle of all this? Is loving thy neighbor as thyself, reaching out, understanding who your neighbor is. See, there's a certain thing called spiritual selfishness. Spiritual selfishness. People become spiritual, engage in spiritual activity, but they're very selfish. And that can express itself on two ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, on the lowest end, you'll say, a person who's spiritual, engages in religious activity, begins to see themselves as holier than thou. They are holier than you. There's a certain separation that starts to develop. Judgment starts to settle in. You're not as religious as me. So religion and observance of spiritual experience sometimes separates and creates a greater ego in the person, which is not healthy. That's on the one end of the spectrum of spiritual selfishness. On the other hand of spiritual selfishness is probably a more noble, loftier end. People are focused on their own personal refinement. It doesn't create distance necessarily in terms of judgment. They're just focused on being a good inner person. It's all focused on their own personal refinement. They want to leave this world more refined than they came. That's a lofty idea. But both these ideas of self-centered spirituality is antithetical to basic principle of Judaism, which says, love thy neighbor as thyself. See, it's not about you. If anything spiritual is about yourself on either end of the spectrum, that's not what Jewish spirituality is about. It's about the other. Everything you learned about yourself, all the previous 9 principles, isn't to inflate your ego or to separate from yourself from others. It's about empowering you. It's about empowering you to have an impact. And the only way you can have a real impact with others and in the world around you is if you understand yourself better. So it's not about selfishness. It's about empowerment. What's really important about change, making an impact on others. It's not about yourself. It's about how do you see another person. If you are valuable in this world, so is the other person. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love thy neighbor as thyself. If you begin to see yourself in the proper context of healthy Jewish spirituality, inevitably you're going to see your neighbor as just as valuable. If you see yourself as part of a greater mission, if you see yourself placed in this world not for your own benefit, but for the impact you'll make, the other person's also important. As we've mentioned many times, waking up in the morning and opening up your eyes means that God needs you here. That's not to inflate your ego, because if God needs you here and that's why you open your eye, that person opened their eyes, God needs them as much as you are. We're all part of this. We're all part of that same symphony. So this is the Klal Gadol. This is the big principle and idea that Judaism wants to teach us, that this principle is teaching us, that loving thy neighbor as thyself is not about a rule. It's about understanding that you are not about yourself, you are about others. And I want to conclude with a little funny story about this, but this is a paradigm shift. So there's once this very wealthy, narcissistic, successful businessman who has had many, many developments and many projects around the city. And he went to visit one of his big new building projects. And of course, it was a construction zone. And unfortunately, he falls into a pit. He falls into a hole and he can't get out. So one person comes and says, "Here, give me your hand. Give me your hand." Another person says, "Here, give me your hand. Give me your hand." He doesn't give his hand and he stays here. They can't get him out. Finally, one last chance that his wife comes and says, "Honey, give me your hand. Give me your hand." Doesn't give his hand. Doesn't come out. He's going to be there. They don't know what to do. So they go to the rabbi. Say, "Rabbi, we have this predicament. Mr. Markowitz is stuck in the ditch and he doesn't want to get out. We kept asking him to give us his hand. He doesn't want to give it." Rabbi says, "Don't worry. I'll deal with this." He runs over to the construction site and he sticks his hand into the construction site and says a few words to Mr. Markowitz. Mr. Markowitz gives us his hand and out he comes. They're amazed. "Rabbi, what'd you do? You're a miracle man." Says, "No, I know Mr. Markowitz. The problem is you asked him to give you his hand. Mr. Markowitz is the biggest miser. He doesn't give anything to anyone. I told Mr. Markowitz, 'Take my hand, take my hand.' He took it. I was able to pull him out." See, the question is taking or giving. The question here is, do we live a life that we want to take? And not necessarily in a selfish way of taking like a miser. But we look at everything as, how does this benefit me? How does this serve me? How does it make me a better person? Very noble, but still about yourself. We are takers. The principle here is, don't be a taker. Be a giver. Don't ask, how does this thing impact me? Ask yourself, how can I use this to impact others? This is the basic principle of this verse, of loving thy neighbor as thyself. Understanding that it's not about you. And this is where we're going to shift over the next 3 verses, is understanding. A better spiritual understanding about yourself is really there about motivating you to be a giver. And this is something I want you to think about today. I see there are many comments and people are talking about the timeliness of this message, importance of this message. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. To see another person's life as valuable as yours is very timely on many different levels, especially what's going on today. But to apply it in a very powerful way, I want you to ask yourself about Judaism and ask yourself a question about something in Judaism that's very meaningful to you, that something in Judaism that you do gain a lot from. And then ask yourself a question. This means so much to me. This inspires me and empowers me so much. Ask yourself, how is this not inspiring me, but how is this inspiring me to give to others, to impact others, and to impact the world around us? Now, this is a big idea, as we said. It's not easy to always be a giver instead of a taker. And I want to emphasize, giving and taking is not necessarily selfish ways, but it's to realize that we're here not for our own good, but for others. How do we shift into that new paradigm is what we'll explain in part 2 on Thursday when we discuss this at our morning class. But for now, take this story, take these ideas. Let's think about this, not how we can judge and criticize others for how they're acting to others. More importantly, it all begins, how do you see other people? How do you see other people who disagree with you? How do you see other people who you feel are the worst people in the world? Do you feel that they have value, and with love and kindness, you can even impact them? So let's use this, not as a reason of judgment of how others see others, but how are we able to impact those other people? And I believe we will have a wonderful day. And if people start seeing things in this way, it won't only make them understand their Jewish ideas better, it will make the impact that we have that much more healthier and that much more productive. So that's the part one of this big idea of love thy neighbor as thyself being the basic principle of Judaism. As I've mentioned, we'll continue this on Thursday. Tomorrow morning at 8:30, we will be here with a very inspirational, motivational story to begin tomorrow's day. But in the meantime, today, got our work cut out for us, and I hope you have a very successful and meaningful day. Bye-bye.